Hello and welcome to the next edition of our New South Wales Referees Life Member Series. Today we're here with a former first grade referee and current chairman of the association, Life Member Peter Filmer. Welcome, Pete.
Morning, Daniel. How are you going, mate?
I'm very well. How are you? What are you doing in these strange and uncertain times to keep yourself busy and occupied?
Yeah, it's a bit difficult, isn't it, mate? Fortunately, a bit like Michael Stone the other day, we're lucky our golf course is still open up here, so we can play in pairs. So I'm playing a lot more golf than I would have at this time of the year with a normal football commitment. And our workplace is still going, although this week I've decided to take a week's annual leave.
So I suppose under the current criteria, you're getting plenty of exercise in then?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I do actually still walk Springwood Golf Course. Just finding as I'm getting older, though, the hills are getting steeper.
How's your handicap?
Yeah, it hovers around 19, mate.
Okay.
Honest man, honest golfer I am, very honest.
All right, so you're currently working for Blacktown City Council and have done for a long period of time. Can you outline your role at the moment?
Yes, I'm council's manager of events and sister cities. I've been doing this role now for close on 30 years, or a bit longer actually, 32 years. It's great. It's a great role. It feeds very much into my personality type and what I do. A little note for Dennis Spagarino, who constantly reminds me of how hard he used to work, and I didn't even know he was a public servant himself. But I'm really proud of what I do, and we work very hard for the community. We do a great job in organising all the major events, or of course at the moment they're all on hold. We do a lot of international work through our Sister Cities program and a lot of civic work through the councillors and the mayor. So it's a pretty involved role, but I really enjoy it.
Am I right in saying one particular event is Relay for Life that you're quite heavily or have been involved in before?
Yeah, we have a councillor here, Kathy Collins, who is a very dedicated councillor who brought the whole Relay for Life concept to Blacktown at around the same time that I actually was diagnosed with cancer. And so the timing of that was like the perfect storm, I guess. I finished up chair of the Relay for Life here at Blacktown for a number of years and was captain of the council team that used to go into it. We're not quite as engaged with it now as we were, but yeah, that's one of the events that we coordinate, yeah.
All right, let's start by going all the way back to the beginning in terms of your on-field career. Why did you decide to take up the whistle way back in 1980 at Penrith, and how did this take place? Now, I believe you had some preliminary cracks at this in 75 and 77. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, Daniel, there's a couple of false starts before I got into it full time. Back in 1975, some of the older members will recall that the New South Wales Rugby League determined that it wasn't going to take responsibility for competitions below under 10s, that if districts wanted to run them, they would run them, but they would be also responsible for them. Well, these days, of course, you can play and referee, but back in those days, you weren't allowed to. So the Penrith Rugby League relented and said, well, I guess if we're running it, we make the rules, so we'll allow players that are playing on Sunday to referee on Saturdays. That only lasted one season, that relaxation of the rules, so I was able to referee, so I'd go out and do under 7s, 8s, 9s on the Saturday and then play on the Sunday. Then in 1977, I didn't play any club football. HSC year, I decided to just referee one day a weekend and then play school football. And so again, I had another crack. I used to go out on Saturdays and referee, and then just played school football. So they were two cracks at it before eventually in 1980. I coached junior league teams in 78. I should go back. In 1977, I was on a Penrith schoolboy tour of New Zealand, and sustained a very bad injury, dislocated my ankle and broke my leg all in the one tackle. Basically told that if that were to happen again, we couldn't fix it. It was the doctor's call. So there was, it was a no-brainer, I guess, as much as I loved playing. So I coached two teams in 78 and 79, lost a grand final, won a grand final. And I had expected really expected to be appointed coach of the Penrith SG Ball side in 1980. And I didn't get that appointment, disappointingly. So then I was working with Merv Edwards at Blacktown Council at the time, and Merv said, well, why don't you come back and referee? And that was the start of it. I started back in Penrith in 1980 and never regretted it one little bit.
We'll touch on your playing later on and how that influenced your refereeing. But did you think the grounding you had as a player and as a coach helped you initially in getting started in refereeing?
Undoubtedly, Daniel, undoubtedly. When I coached in 78 and 79, I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed coaching the kids, but I had no connection to the teams. Wasn't a parent or anything of anybody. I had no sibling. Oh, my brother was in one of the teams, but I had no real connection to the teams yet. Even winning a competition in 1979, the parent body of that particular group weren't all that happy. I don't know what else I could have done for them, but anyway, some kids didn't feel like they got as fair a go as others. I don't know. And that turned me off it. It just turned me off coaching. But as a player, I think that really fed well into my refereeing for sure.
So you're graded member 744. Can you tell us a bit about your story coming into grade in 1985 from Penrith up until the time before making your first grade debut?
Do you believe in fate, Daniel? I do. There's been too many evidence of things that happen in my life that tell me that there's a certain fate to everything that we do. I go back to 1982, and I was supposed to do the C grade grand final on grand final day, and what happened was, for some reason I'm not absolutely aware, even to this day, the timings of the C grade and B grade grand finals were switched around.
Oh, okay.
And I used to get to the ground very early. So I arrived at the ground at Penrith Park, as it was then, and
Here we are in the background.
B grade referee hadn't fronted. It was a fellow by the name of Steve Tyrrell, and Steve later was a graded member. But Steve hadn't read his appointments properly. He just thought he'd be on the same time, which he was, but the two grades had swapped around. So I finished up doing the B grade grand final. Unbeknown to me, a fellow by the name of Reg Dick was at the ground to watch Steve with a perspective to go to grade. And he walked in the dressing room after the game and he thought he was very impressed with what he saw. It was a very tough game of football, started with an all-in brawl 1 minute into the game. Okay. And he really was very impressed with what he saw. I just ran around and I had no aspiration of doing anything like going to grade. That didn't interest me very much at all. But he got me interested. He suggests so. In 1983, lo and behold, the junior rep appointments come out, and President's Cup was the top grade then. It was an under-21 grade. And I find myself in the centre in President's Cup in my first game of junior rep football. I couldn't believe it. I thought I'd be running a line and doing my apprenticeship as most people did. I finished up doing the 1983 President's Cup final, grand final. And that then, of course, in not expecting to be graded in 1984, I struggled with injury, as I did a lot of the time through my football as a consequence of the leg injury. I struggled very much in that pre-season with injury, didn't get graded and deservedly didn't get graded. And then I did in 1985.
So your debut as a first grade referee comes in round 12 of 1987 in a match between Balmain and Western Suburbs at Leichhardt Oval. What were your memories of the week leading up to the game? How were you informed of the appointment? And then the match itself?
Well, the appointments back in those days, Daniel, first and reserve grade appointments were not disclosed anywhere. You would get a phone call about 5 o'clock, roughly 6 o'clock on Thursday night to let you know where you were going that weekend. 2 weeks prior to that, my daughter was born while I was running around on the Sydney Cricket Ground. Unbeknown to me, my wife had gone into labour and we didn't have mobile phones or anything, but my wife sensed something that morning and I thought, do I, don't I go? I did go, but I took my father-in-law with me and my mother-in-law was with my wife, so that wasn't complete. But to this day, my daughter still reminds me about it.
I was going to say, has your wife let you know?
Yeah. It's I get reminded constantly. More about my daughter than my wife. But that morning, I sort of spoke to Eric Cox, and of course, I was at the ground. I was at the Sydney Cricket Ground, actually doing reserve grade. And I said to Eric, "Is there any way I can get away, mate? I've just got a note that, I've just got a message that my wife's gone into labour." So, because in those days you had to hang around and be on standby for first grade. So they worked that all out, but I still got to the hospital too late. But Eric did nudge me and say, "I'm really pleased you refereed today because this was an important game for you." Didn't think in too much more of that. And then I did a Commonwealth Bank Cup game the following week. And then, lo and behold, I get a phone call from Arthur Neville to indicate that I was at Leichhardt on Sunday at 3:00. And I went, "At 3:00? He said, "Yes, congratulations, you're in first grade." So really, I only had Friday, Saturday to worry about Sunday because that's the way the appointments came out. And Eric rang me later that night and congratulated me. And so I didn't really think too much about it. I just had to get into it. I was very lucky, though. I had Mick Ryan and Marty Weeks on my line for that, my first grade game. Felt very comfortable in that because I had two highly experienced and two guys I respected enormously on my line for my first grade debut. And it went okay. A little bit of controversy in the end of the game, but it went okay.
Yeah. So do you think that actually helped being so late in the week that you didn't have as much time to dwell on it?
Pretty ambivalent to that, Daniel. If they'd have told me Monday, it probably wouldn't have made much difference to me. I just shrug my shoulders and move on. Whatever it is, it is. No, I don't think it would have made any difference. I wouldn't have keyed myself up anything more than I would have if it was on Monday morning. No.
You mentioned before about doing a Commonwealth Bank Cup. You're actually one of the few people at the time to referee Commonwealth Bank / AMCO Cup and play an AMCO Cup as well.
Yeah, very proudly, Daniel. I played in the 1976 Blacktown Boys High School team. That won the Commonwealth Bank Cup. Very, very proud of that. And yes, later on, I didn't ever do a Commonwealth Bank Cup final, but I certainly did a semi-final. And it's a bit unique, I guess. Pretty unique.
So coming to the grades, who were influences or people who mentored you as a referee?
Yeah, I guess I got to go back to Penrith. There were three people in Penrith who I absolutely hung off every word, and they were major influences back then. And that'd be Jack Harris. And, I know Jack wasn't everyone's cup of tea. He had an opinion on a lot of things and he ruffled a few feathers. But Jack Harris I was very I guess the fortunate thing, all these three guys I'm going to mention, I actually played football under them before I actually got into the Referees Association full time. So I really respected them as a player. And so that made it easier. But Jack Harris, certainly Merv Edwards. Merv's a dear friend of mine. And what I liked about Merv was he was very direct. He's a very old family friend of our family. But Merv was great. He was terrific. And a fellow who was probably the best Penrith referee never to get graded, a fellow by the name of Don Courts. Don was a very measured, very different type personality, but a really cool customer. But Donnie Courts was great for me as well. So they'd be the three blokes in my Penrith days. I never ever modelled myself on anybody at all. I don't think that's good practice. No, I never modelled myself on anyone.
Yeah. I think some of those names were very influential. They came across from Parramatta in setting up Penrith back in 1966 and 67. And from what I've heard, Jack Harris certainly very much a hard nose.
I do apologise, Daniel. Can you hear the kookaburras in the background? That's all right. Jack Harris and Merv Edwards were the first president and secretary, and Don was instrumental in the creation of the Penrith Referees Association. Yeah, there's no subtle irony in that. They were influential figures and good. And I guess another guy I should mention because there's a synergy here. A fellow by the name of Bob Candelis. Bob was also a terrific fellow who was taken from us quite young, but Bob's grandson is Daniel Alford. So again, there's that referee family, that sort of link going back in the past also.
And you won the Bob Candelas Trophy in 1983, I think it was.
Great trophy to win that, because that's a peers your peers vote on that, the referee's referee of the year, and it was named after Bob. He'd passed by then, and but he was a former first grade touch judge and test touch judge, Bob Candelas. So he was also very influential.
It's interesting that a lot of the people that we speak to, a lot of the mentors actually come at the district level. It's in those early years of your refereeing where you get those key messages, I suppose, that really help you develop as a referee.
It's make or break time, isn't it, Daniel? If you're not strong if you haven't got a strong backbone and a big heart, some of those days running around in the park and it's 5 degrees, pouring rain, it's Katoomba Showground, you can't see one end of the ground from the other. Your touch judges are calling the goals because you can't see them because of the fog. Or it might be 40 degrees at Warragamba, or whatever the case may be. They're make or break times for you. And sometimes it's hard slog. Now, Penrith back in the day, you could do 5, 6, 7 games a weekend. You could do 4 on a Saturday. You could do 3 lines and a centre on a Sunday. It's hard. It's hard slog. And those people are instrumental in keeping you going, that you can pick up the phone and say, look, I've had this incident at, Colleton today. What do I do? Da-da-da-da. If those people aren't ready for you, and you must tap in and learn from their experience. And that's where I like to see myself positioned now, that I have that experience to be able to feed back to the younger guys like yourself. So they're so instrumental. They're so important.
I just wanted to touch on a couple of notable incidences from your first grade career. The first of which we see, there's an article here to do with sin binning Steve Roach in his 100th game. I believe it came in 1987 against North Sydney. Do you have any memories of that incident?
Just now looking at the photo, Daniel, it's not North, it's definitely West, because that's Ian Schubert.
It is too.
We used to get on terrific, Ian and I.
Maybe you sin bin him a couple of times.
Ian, we'll get to that story a little later, but with respect to this particular story, I do recall now. Steve had a lot of input to referees. He basically knew the rules better than we did. But this was nothing more than just a back chat, and I just went, mate, I've had enough today. Away you go. You can. And he actually thanked me because it was a warm day and he could have 5 minutes rest. So I think it was a win-win for both of us.
And he didn't pat you on the head on this occasion, a la Eddie Ward.
No, that was very sad for Eddie. And I always wonder what I would have done if a player had ever decided to do something like that. I probably would have contained myself, but a short right to the jaw probably wouldn't have hurt either.
So you mentioned it before. There was an incident in a trial game in your career, again involving Balmain, where I suppose it was a misconception or a bit of confusion with the media, where they believed you had sent Steve Roach off and then had changed your mind, when in actual fact you'd pointed to the dressing room and signalled 5 minute or 10 minute sin bin at the time.
Yeah, Daniel, this must have been a really slow news day because this made the back page of the paper. I must clarify or qualify here too that only now do I appreciate all of these newspaper clippings. I never kept them myself. My mother kept this wonderful scrapbook of my records, and at the time I didn't see the need for it, but I'm so glad she did now. I just pointed and then put my hand up straight after I pointed. I don't know where the confusion came about. And the late Peter Flingos, to his great credit, gave me a response, a chance to respond, which you see there on the bottom left of the clip, and that was done and dusted. But I just thought to myself, this is a very slow news day today when this makes the back page of the Monday Mirror or whatever it was at the time.
It's funny like how some incidents happen and it's sort of a storm in a teacup to us.
Yeah, it is. As I said, this was another back chat incident on a very, very hot day at Leichhardt. It was a pre-season trial, and I just you know, I said, you can go and have a rest, mate. Pointed. Then I put my hands up, and by definition, go and have a rest. I think the Cronulla players, it was a Cronulla, they played Cronulla. Cronulla players felt that I had dismissed him. That was never my intention on the day at all.
Now, 1990 was a tough year for you. Why was this a tough year, and how did you work your way back?
Mate, I never ever used this as an excuse in my whole time that I refereed, but that ankle injury that I sustained back in 1976, 77, plagued me forever and a day, and still does today. But I never used it as an excuse. I just worked around it. There'd be some days I'd go home from training. Some days I'd go home from a game, and I'd be near tears in pain, and then that's the truth. But I never ever used that as an excuse. I just plugged away. But 1990, I really contemplated. I just couldn't get past the injury. I was constant physio all the time, and I was probably spending more in physio than I was making out of the game, to be very honest. But I got through. And it got better. The injury got better. I had a minor operation during the off-season that season, and that seemed to fix things pretty much. And as I said, all along, I've kept this all to myself. I've never, ever declared this to anybody prior to this interview, actually, other than some close friends who know. So 1990 was tough. I hobbled through 1990, to be very fair. But I had a minor op, and it came good. So, it was better anyway.
Yeah. For a very level-headed and calm sort of a man, did that actually frustrate you, seeing that the opportunities were at your doorstep and you had all this potential and you had this niggling injury that you couldn't quite shake off?
I guess so, mate. Yeah, look, it's a funny thing. I was never built like a halfback or a winger. Well, thank Christ I was never built like a winger. Being built the way I was, big man, and, unlike a lot of people, I just have to walk past a cake shop to put weight on. I don't even have to go in through the front door. It was frustrating. It certainly was, and I wished, I don't live with any regrets. I have no regrets, but I just wished I could have been a little fitter and a little faster, I guess. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. But yes, it was very frustrating for sure.
I think that ties in nicely with what we're about to talk about next. There was a Tui's ad that you were involved in, and it ended up being pulled. Why was that?
Well, I don't know. It was never conveyed to me, Daniel, why it was pulled. I was always nudged that perhaps that wasn't the image that they were looking for. They were looking for the Billy Harrigan type image, and that's fine. I respect that and understand that. But I did it, and it was good fun.
Yep.
The original the footage you see on the ad, this tells you how television can trick things up. The footage that was on the ad bear no resemblance at all to what happened on the day, and the reason being that the day that the game that we did, Cronulla and Illawarra, that game was played on a beautiful day like today. It would have been a day perfect like today. When we went out to Cronulla on the Friday to shoot the rest of the bits to put into the ad, it's pouring rain.
Yep.
So they actually shot a full ad rather than they didn't incorporate any of the original footage into the other than Glenn Coleman did score a try and that there was some authenticity around that. But I did it. I enjoyed it. And, yeah, it was a little disappointing that I wasn't the image that they wanted. But at the end of the day, that's the way the game was gravitating then. It was moving away from, to a more athlete-type image, which we have today, which locks out, which I'm very sad about because I think it does lock out some really good referees, really, really good referees.
Yeah. So we touched on it earlier about your background in playing and coaching and how that helped you as a referee. Everyone I talk to always raves about how excellent a referee Peter Filmer was and how he always had a feel for the game, was an excellent man manager, and as you touched on before, your weight, that never let you down in terms of decision making and handling players and working to get a good outcome. Was that something you planned as a strength in your refereeing, the man management and control side?
Plan's a bit strong, Daniel. personality plays such an enormous part. I was talking to someone the other day about profiling of referees and the sort of academics type way in which we approach finding referees, developing referees. And okay, that's the way it is in the 2020s. But plan's too strong. But I knew I had, and I've always had a great rapport or a personality that lends itself to rapport with people, not just football, but with people. And so I never worked hard at that at all. I just knew that the way I wanted to approach the players is the way that I liked referees approaching me when I played. And, you know, that's the way I approached it. And I was very fortunate in that played a bit of rep football and therefore got refereed by Dennis Braybrook in that Amco Shield grand final. And through that Amco Shield days, we had grade referees all the way through. So it was interesting. I just wanted the players. I knew what I responded to as a player, and therefore I wanted to apply that back through as a referee because I knew what the players wanted. That doesn't mean you had every player on side, trust me. But I had a greater majority, and I proudly can say that blokes that I talk to now, as you say, will say the same thing, that good referee, you know, he knew how it worked and he could read it. And but I never worked at it, never planned it. I just knew I had it. And that's the way I applied it.
Yeah. I think looking at some of these articles, I think a word that comes to mind is empathy, which as a result of byproduct is that respect that comes across between the referee and players, showing that you do understand, and particularly from your background, you understand what they're going through at the time during the course of an 80-minute game.
Can be dangerous at the same time, Daniel. You can be empathetic with players, but you cannot be sympathetic with players. And there's a fine line there. There's a very, very fine line. But some of the things I used to say to them, you know, I used to say, mate, I understand, but I didn't write the rules. I just got to apply them. Things like that. And that would get players on side, you know. Or you'd say to the player, would say, well, I think you got that wrong. And I'd say, well, maybe I have, but we're moving on. And players would accept that. They would generally accept that.
That's good. So your last game as a first grade referee came in round 4 of 1992 in a match between Wests and Norths. Did you know at the time this was your last game in first grade, and how did this come about?
Absolutely not, mate. That was round 4 of that season. And in round 3, I refereed poorly. I just was not on that day. And to this day, I can't ever put a finger on why. I just was not on that day. Thankfully, South Sydney actually smashed Canterbury that day, which the scoreline was irrelevant, but my performance was poor. But the next week, I went out there and I know I refereed. You know yourself. You know when you've refereed well or you haven't. I know I refereed really, really well. It was Wests and was it Wests? Yeah, it was Wests and Norths out at Campbelltown, and I knew. And as I said, you know in your heart of hearts whether you did referee well or not. I think the script had already been written, Daniel, to be very fair. I think that that was a sort of it was sold to me as, well, you've got to referee well this week or you're in trouble. I think I was already in trouble, and that was more just a panacea to get me over the line to say. The board man of the day sat with one of the coaches on the day. The report that I got did not reflect at all my performance in my view. And indeed, the report reflected a forward pass that I'd apparently ruled on for no try, when indeed the pass never existed. I went back on the tape. I don't know where that. So I'm going to be very blunt, mate, and I say that I think the script was written before I got there. And so what did I take from that, though? What did I take from that? I took from that everything that I've applied in the latter years when I coached referees, etc. You always learn. You can salvage something from a shipwreck. And I took a great deal out of that day, that I would never, ever, ever, ever be that dishonest towards anyone that I coached. You know that, and you've been coached by me a lot of times, mate. And I always call it as it is, and I'll never pretend that it's not.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And a lot of the people who have been coached by you understand that you are always honest, but you also always give that avenue for a reply. If there's something there that's a 50-50, you're open to that discussion on the particular incident.
Always, mate.
Yeah. So if you could single out one appointment, moment, or experience from your career as a highlight, what would that be?
Yeah, I guess any grand final that you do is always good. I did. And people are probably going to laugh a little bit at this, but for me it was an important appointment. What is now the Massey Cup was back in the day. I've completely forgotten the name of the competition.
Beam, Metropolitan.
Yeah, even way before that. But it was the very first year, first year that level competition was brought back into play, and I was appointed to the grand final of that year. And any appointment in the grand final in grade is I think is significant. And I know it doesn't reach the Burleigh heights of first grade grand finals and that sort of thing, but that was a significant appointment for me. I felt that was it was the first year of the particular cup, whatever the name of the cup was, and I just felt that was a really good appointment. I did the reserve grade of that competition grand final the year after. And that probably combined with your first ever first grade game. History shows now that the two teams that I refereed on that day are now amalgamated as one side. So there's the progression of history through that. But yeah, your first grade game. Got to say, mate, it flew. It went for the first 40 minutes. I couldn't believe when the halftime bell rang. That game just flew.
Can you tell us a little bit about the story about the period of time between your last first grade match before heading into the video box in 1998?
Yeah, that's rather funny in a lot of ways. I retired at the end of 1994. Again, injury. I just couldn't commit to another pre-season. I just couldn't do it. And I now wish, if there's any one regret, I wish I had have tried to stick it out, because we have, of course, had the Super League bust up in 95, and therefore all of a sudden what happened was I retired in 94, and Michael Stone was the boss of the referees, and I was given the opportunity. I asked him if I could be put on the appointments board. I felt I still had a lot to offer, and could I get a run out there just doing assessments on referees every weekend? And I was accepted for that, which was good.
Yep.
And then when the whole Super League storm blew up, I was asked if I would run a line in that sort of what is now the Massey Cup. If I'd run a line and do an assessment on a referee at the same time, that's how desperate things were, because we didn't have the people in the ranks. Well, being the world's worst touch judge, this was always going to be interesting. So what I finished up doing in 1995 was actually said to Michael, well, if you're going to get me to run, I'm going to take up the whistle again and referee. And he said to me, could you referee in that lower tier cup? Geez, I wish I could think of the name. And so for the back half of that season, I refereed again in the second tier, second division. He parked me away in games that you looked at the table and thought, well, they're going to be runaways, so that's all right. We can, and I sort of developed a new style of refereeing, I guess, where you could walk for a lot of it and get through it. And, spent a lot of time at the ruck. But then again, perhaps in that comp you needed to. And I never forget my last game in grade was a foggy night in that level at Hammondville Oval. I'll never forget it. It was 96-0, but it didn't matter what mistakes I made because nobody could see for the fog.
Yep.
So I'll never forget that. So I came back for a short time at the request of people just to get us through. And eventually when it all came back together, I got a spot on the video team. Enjoyed every minute of that. That was great fun. But I always felt the coaching side of that for me was more relevant than the actual decision-making on the video.
Yep. So we'll talk about the video now. Initially, before your retirement, you're a bit hesitant about video technology.
Technological dinosaur is me, Daniel, and I didn't have a lot of foresight that would suggest that.
We got you on. You mentioned yesterday it was a miracle to get you set up on this Zoom.
It certainly is, mate. You can be assured of that. But yeah, that article you can see on the screen now was written. I never could foresee the day where technology would be available at all grounds, where all games would be televised. How wrong was I? And that's okay. It's not the first and last thing I'll be wrong about. But yeah, I could never foresee. That every ground would have television coverage, and therefore, from that perspective, that's how it was. I just couldn't never see it.
Yep. So how did it come about you going into the video ref box?
I was approached by Mick Stone, and a lot of ex-first grade referees were approached to see if we'd like to have a go at that, and I certainly jumped at the opportunity. You know, to stay involved with the game and stay engaged at first grade level was terrific. So it was just a simple approach, and so there it was. I think when I came in, we had 10 games a weekend. There were 10 first grade games, including I know I did a game at Adelaide Oval when the Adelaide team was in. So yeah, that's how it came about. It was just a simple phone call approach. Would I like to get involved with this stuff?
And now there's one particular game I just want to highlight in your career as a video ref, and be interesting to hear from Paul Simpkins down the track more about the experience. We'll just have a listen first. There's a little bit of audio, and then we'll talk over the top of it.
A jab sliding kick, which put some pressure on Kane. He's got to get low. He's lost it. Have they come up with a try? Must be very, very close, this one.
Well, to the naked eye, that's it.
In fact, that's his first touch of the ball. Peter Filmer is the video referee, but I think this is a fair try.
Yep.
Simpkins speaking with Peter Filmer. They're conferring.
Ball was cut loose.
For mine, it's a try.
Yep.
There it is. A little bit of luck.
So it was a game at the turn of the century in the early 2000s, Canberra versus Tigers, the first grade game played in snow. Now, it got up to, I think, the heights of 3 degrees or something like that in the second half when the snow started to subside. What were your memories of that day? You were certainly probably rugged up in the best seat in the house that day.
Yeah, I certainly had the best seat in the house, Daniel. There was a lot of what it alerted to me on that day was how much television, I don't know about now, but certainly back then, how much television controlled the game. Yep. I have no doubt at that game not being due for television, it would never have been played. All I saw was a lot of argy-bargy between a lot of officials pre-game in touch with the league, the National Rugby League. Do we play it? Don't we play it? Da-da. And I know that television had such an enormous part to play in influencing the decision to play that game. Okay. What I do remember about that day was, I think ultimately, Canberra might have won that comfortably in the end, but it was a lot of points scored on that day, actually. But there was a funny comment just after, because there's a lot to look at in that particular incident. And on balance, we awarded the try, but there was a lot to look at, and it did take a little bit of time. If you run that commentary on a little bit later sometime, you'll hear Steve Roach. Steve Roach was the guest, one of the commentators, and he said, geez, I hope Filmer doesn't take us long to make all decisions like that today, but the players could freeze to death, which I thought was rather funny. But it was a strange old day. It was the influence of television was massive in the fact that whether that game would be played or otherwise.
Yeah, a very strange game indeed. And it's funny looking back, even just in those two clips, the ball handling and the risks that are taken in the in-goal area there were, particularly in those conditions, was quite surprising. We'll move along.
There was a winger that dropped the ball, Daniel.
Well, I am going to ask you about your thoughts on wingers before we finish today. So since your retirement as an active match official, you've dived headfirst both into a coach of the junior reps and also the grade squad. How did you find these roles, and how did you find your way into these roles as well?
Yeah, again, it was an individual approach. What happened was got released from the video box 2002, 2003, not quite sure. And I approached Dennis Spagarino, who was the coach of the grade squad at the time. And Dennis and I, you've pulled some good photos out here, mate. Dennis and I I just said to Dennis, could I get back on the appointments board, or not the appointments board, or the advisory board? Did that, and then positions opened up here, there, and 2005, Tony Danks asked me if I would take on the lead role, the head coach of the junior reps, which I jumped at, and that rolled on to the head coach of the grade squad, or coach of the grade squad. Great times, had just fantastic. Really just loved coaching people. Still do love coaching people. And 217 at the end of the 217 season, Stuart indicated that they were going in a different direction and my services weren't required. And I'll be very blunt. I still to this day don't agree with that decision, because I still think I have a lot to offer, and that's meant as no disrespect to the people who do now hold those coaching roles. But I'd still love to be involved coaching people, but that's not to be. But all in all, I just loved every minute of it, mate. But it was all through contact and approach, and being prepared to ask the question, can I get involved? How can I get involved? I want to be involved. Just love coaching people.
Yeah. I think it goes to show mentality in life. If you're not proactive in what you do, you're not going to get very far.
No, you have to have a mindset that, look, Daniel, this game has let me down a lot of times, but I still can't give back what it's also given me, and that's so important. It's given me so much, and I'll never be able to repay what it's given me. But yeah, there have been dark days, and it has let me down, and I've been wanting to kick palings off the fence, but you just got to get over it and move on.
Yeah. Well, we touched on your delivery of feedback before, and the respect that the active match officials had for you in those roles. You're still currently doing MDA to this date, which is good to see. You're a very valuable resource for all the current active members. Now, we talk about recognition and service. You became a life member of our grade association in 1995. Can you tell us a little bit about what this recognition meant to you?
Oh, Daniel, I was never so proud. To be made a life member of an organisation that's been going since 1908, and you look at the people, the names of the people who appear on the list of life membership of that organisation, preceding me and after me, at the time I became life member, that's pretty high-level company to be part of, and life membership of any sporting organisation or of any organisation is the highest level of recognition you can obtain. To be firstly nominated by somebody, seconded by somebody, and then the majority of the members voting on the night to support that nomination. That's fantastic, mate. So I hold it right up there. It's a high station, high honour.
Now, since your life membership, you've continued to contribute in multiple ways to the association, and you were recognised further in 2014 when you won which is now the Doug Winton Award, the former George and Amy Hansen Award. What did this mean to you?
Yeah, the George and Amy Hansen Trophy is a curious one in that people don't. I never really knew the history of George and Amy Hansen. To this day, I don't. But what I do know is, again, your name goes on a trophy that contains the names of people who have made massive contributions to our association. So it just means a lot to be recognised for something. But I must someday do the history on who George and Amy Hansen were. And there's a few stories. Joey Griffiths tells a great story about it, but I'm not quite sure that it's factually correct. But it's a great story.
Yeah. And then I suppose probably this would be the most significant for anyone in the association. 2 years later, in 2016, you received the Eric Cox Medal. Now, you mentioned names on a trophy. There is, if referees had immortals, we've got all our immortals on this trophy or medal name. What did this mean to you?
Oh, Daniel, Eric Cox in the initial stages was one of my greatest nemesis. Turned out to be one of my great mates in terms of refereeing. Eric had a little, in the early days, didn't have a lot of faith in me until he actually came out and watched me referee that President's Cup final. And that turned him around. And then he became a really strong supporter of me, and that was important back in the day. You know, you needed to be in Coxey's stable. If you weren't, it was tough. But the Eric Cox Medal is I guess, afterlife membership. It's the ultimate recognition for what you've done for for our association, and just very proud, very, very proud.
So steering away from refereeing specifically in a moment, again, further recognition for yourself. In 2014, you received the inordinate honour of an Order of Australia. You're a very modest person, I know, but you must be extremely proud of this achievement, not just for yourself, but for your family as well.
Stunned, Daniel. To be very honest, I was stunned. How it works, mate, is you get a letter about 6 weeks out from either, Australia Day or Queen's birthday, June. You get a letter asking you if you're prepared to accept nomination. I just had to sit there and go, really? I really did not expect the letter at all. Of course, I quickly jumped inside it and said, yes, I'm very proud to accept it. I guess what it does, mate, is it provides ultimate recognition of you across all the things you do in your life. You're like, there's nothing more important as my family in my life. But this really embraced a whole lot of things that I've done. Rugby league, cricket, service to community. I mean, that was the irony. The award was given for service to sport and community, which is a pretty good nomenclature to put against the award, that it just doesn't relate to years of coaching cricket teams and coaching cricket rep teams and refereeing and coaching referees my work with the Cancer Council and all the other fundraising stuff that I do. It captured it was a net that captured everything that I do. And I think that, to be an Order of Australia is to have that award. It's very special. It's very, very special, but it doesn't change me. It's still me, but it's very special.
I think that's something very important. All the accolades you've had and being a first grade referee, you're still very much a down-to-earth person. You're always willing to give your time to others just to listen to their stories and their concerns, which is a credit to yourself. So you're currently chairman of this great association, and I believe this is your second year of chairmanship. What's your vision for our association, particularly moving forward with a potential amalgamation with the Country Referees Association?
Gee, Daniel, I wish I could answer that sitting here at 9:30 on the 24th of April, 2020. What the structure of all rugby league might look like post-COVID-19 is really a guess, I think. But let's assume that everything comes back to normal, or at least the new normal. We are working solidly with the Country Rugby League Referees Association to form one refereeing body within New South Wales. And that's all progressing well. There's a lot of positive discussion between CRLRA and ourselves as to make that happen. Qualifying, of course, that we were driven to that because of the amalgamation of the league and the Country Rugby League. So it was inevitable that was going to happen. Regrettably, with the COVID-19 interruption at the moment, we've not been able to progress that too far. The reality is, Daniel, as I keep saying to people, once upon a time, the New South Wales Rugby League was the preeminent appointment authority for refereeing, at least on the eastern seaboard where the game was principally played. Things have moved on. And we must accept that our role now must be very centred towards representation of our associations at the district level, and it'll be the country group level. Our organisation must set itself up to be the preeminent development arm of refereeing in New South Wales.
Yep.
That's what we must now. We must now target ourselves to be the development arm, to take the referees through to the junior rep squad, to the grade squad, to the NRL squad. We can't pretend any longer that we are dominant at the top of the tree, because that's just not how it is. Although the only caveat I put on all of this, of course, is what's next? What's next when the game comes, back is played, and no one really knows. No one really knows. So we just have to be essentially aware and ready for what challenges we're presented with once COVID-19's over, and what the new model might look like.
Yeah, I think picking up on a couple of things you've said on occasions throughout your chairmanship so far, really important pillars, as you've said, the development side, but also preserving that illustrious history of the great association.
You're right. Heritage and history should play a big part in maintaining our existence. We've got the history. We've got the history. We've got the legacy, and I'll fight to the last breath to maintain our existence in this game, because we're important. We are important, and it's going to be a tough slog in the next 6 months. There's no question of that.
Yep. So not only are you a life member of our association, but you're also a life member of Penrith, which you became in 1990. Your contribution to that association has been immense. Through your work, not only with Penrith referees and the council and your local area, you have a great passion for the west of Sydney. What does Penrith referees mean to you?
Oh, Penrith referees means everything to me, Daniel. I look at I achieved a few milestones as a Penrith referee, I have to say.
Grand final.
Certainly first referee to do a junior rep grand final coming out of Penrith. And I always people argue back, but I still maintain I'm the first local Penrith referee to referee first grade. Given that others before me, and Barry Barnes and Jack Harris, those people were members of other associations that joined Penrith after they'd done their initial first grade games. So I would argue that I was the first Penrith junior referee to referee first grade, which is great. I mean, Penrith, when I came through, it was hard to get a start from Penrith. It really was. We were out there in the foot of the mountains, and no one really wanted to know us all that much. Politics of the game that I never understood back then, it's much clearer to me now. But I'd like to think that in some respect, if there's any self-adulation here at all, I'd like to think I pioneered the way for the next generation of Penrith referees. And there's so many now in the grade ranks and in the NRL, and it's just wonderful that I'd love to think that I might have cracked the egg and made people aware that there's some bloody good referees in Penrith. Penrith Referees Association, everything to me. I don't contribute to them now as much as I possibly could or should. I'd like to think I'm doing it in a quasi fashion by being chair of New South Wales, but I try to get to meetings, but that's difficult. There would have been none of this if it hadn't been for Penrith Referees Association. None of this at all.
Yeah. Now, we're all missing football in these times, and I think it's a good time to reflect on what football has given us, what refereeing has given us. What's the biggest benefit that it's given Peter Filmer throughout his career, both on and off the field?
I think just staying engaged with people, Daniel, staying engaged with younger people too. I have the great benefit, people like yourself and all the other young people in the grade squad now, I have children your age. Therefore, I like to think a little bit that I know what you're thinking, although sometimes the generational gap gets proven, both in the football ranks and in my family. But being able to stay engaged with people, it's given me the great opportunity to mix and mingle and chat to people. And that's the great thing for me. I am seriously challenged by this COVID-19 stuff, mate. I can tell you, if we weren't allowed to play golf, I reckon I might have been a basket case by now. I've really seriously been challenged by this in terms of not being able to be out there and engaged in the normal fashion. And it's been good, though. It's been good because whilst there's no football being played, and whilst I'm getting a fair bit more golf played than I was previously in the football season, I still hanker for the first day back. I can tell you now, I'm really waiting for that to happen.
Yeah. Well, before we head into our Fast Five either or to finish, here's your forum, Peter Filmer. I remember stories coming through into Parramatta and then into the junior reps. Pete would always come out to a camp and he'd tell us a little about what he thought about wingers. What do you think about wingers?
I'm going to explain the myth now, Daniel. I always use it as it's a really good starter because the way I look at it, the winger of today, of course, is like the second row forward of my day. But I love them, really. No, I don't. I do respect them. But as I keep saying, mate, that's why there's a sideline and a corner post. So that's where wingers know where to run and when to stop. And wingers just hang around football teams because no one else will hang around with them. But wingers do talk to touch judges. I'm sort of become aware of that. No, mate, I just use that very much. In my playing days, we were bruised in a grand final by a winger who dropped the ball. All he had to do was put it over the line and we win the grand final, and he couldn't manage that.
Wasn't Neville Glover?
No, don't knock Nev. Nev was a great player. No, we were bruised back in about under 12. So, geez, that was only 50 years ago. Not that I've forgotten. No, it's just a wonderful discussion point. When you're a front row forward and they are the real people in our game, will always remain the real people in the game, front row forwards. Game with no football without front row forwards.
Yep.
So wingers became natural enemy number one, I guess.
Okay. All right. Now, Fast Five to finish off. Barbecue or tomato sauce?
Depends what I'm eating.
Okay. Ford or Holden?
Holden.
Good man. State of Origin or Grand Final?
Had I have ever been given the opportunity, mate, Grand Final would rate. I know State of Origin's magnificent football. I get it. But I still would have loved to have been worthy of doing a first-grade grand final.
Yep. Now, this one, you might actually get a little bit of this up at the mountains. Beach or snow?
There's absolutely no reason for anyone in the wide world to spend vast sums of money to slush around in the snow other than if you're drinking brandy in front of the fire. Beach.
And money or free time?
If you'd asked me that question 30 years ago, Daniel, money was a winner, but now free time is just so essential. So, yeah, free time.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Pete. It's been an absolute pleasure today. It's been very enjoyable spending this time talking to you. Look after yourself and your family. To everyone else at home, stay safe. We're almost getting out of this thing. So let's knock it on the head and get it over and done with and bring the footy back. So thanks for Daniel, a great chat, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. And I congratulate you on this initiative, mate. It's wonderful. Fantastic initiative, mate.
All right. See you, Pete. Be in touch.
See you later, Daniel. Thanks, mate.